So you think medieval times were simpler? You've seen the movies, right? Knights in shining armour, maidens in flowing gowns, stone castles perched on misty hillsides, feasts with roasted meat and ale flowing freely. Maybe you've even thought to yourself that life back then must have been easier. No emails, no traffic, no corporate meetings, just honest work, fresh air, and a connection to the land. Let me stop you right there. The medieval period, particularly the 14th century we're focusing on tonight, was one of the most brutal eras to be alive if you were anyone except the tiny fraction at the very top, and even they had their own set of miseries. But for the vast majority of people, the peasants who made up roughly 85 to 90% of the population, life was a relentless grind of backbreaking labour, disease, hunger, and early death. There was no retirement plan, there was no moving up the social ladder, there was only survival, and for many even that was temporary. Tonight, we're going to walk through a single day in your life as a 14th century peasant in England. Just 24 hours. And I can tell you right now, you probably wouldn't make it. Not because you're weak, but because every single thing you take for granted in the modern world, from clean water to basic medicine to the simple dignity of privacy, didn't exist. The gap between your life and theirs is so vast that it's almost impossible to comprehend. Before we begin this journey into discomfort, I want you to get settled. Maybe dim the lights, put on something comfortable, because the irony of listening to this from your heated home, in your soft bed, with running water just down the hall is not lost on me. What we're about to describe is going to make you grateful for things you've never even thought to appreciate. Let's set the scene properly. It's the year 1325, right in the heart of what historians call the High Middle Ages, though there was nothing particularly high about the living conditions for most people. You're in rural England, somewhere in the countryside where most people lived. Villages were small, perhaps 100 to 300 people clustered together in a collection of wooden huts surrounded by fields that stretched to the horizon. The feudal system rules everything. You are not a free person in any sense we would recognise today. You are a villain, which is a type of serf, legally bound to the land you work. You cannot leave without permission from your lord. You cannot marry without his approval. You work his fields several days a week for free, and whatever you grow on your small plot you owe him a portion. Then the church takes another 10% as a tithe. What's left barely keeps you alive. The landscape around you would be familiar in some ways. Rolling green fields, forests in the distance, a river winding through the valley. But everything else would assault your senses. The smell, first and foremost. Medieval England reeked. A combination of unwashed bodies, animal waste, wood smoke, rotting food and human sewage that went wherever gravity took it. Your nose would never adjust no matter how long you stayed. The sounds would be different too. No cars, obviously, no planes overhead, no hum of electricity or air conditioning. Instead, the constant noise of animals, chickens clucking, pigs rooting, cows lowing, dogs barking, and people. Always people. Because privacy was a luxury that didn't exist for your class. Babies crying, children shouting, adults arguing, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer if you were near the village centre, and over it all, several times a day, the church bells ringing to mark the hours for prayer. The population of England in 1325 was somewhere around 5 to 6 million people, up from about 2 million at the time of the Domesday Book in 1086. But this growth was about to come to a crashing halt. Just 2 decades after our imagined day, the Black Death would arrive and kill somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire population. But even before the plague, death was everywhere. Infant mortality was staggering. Roughly 50% of children died before reaching the age of 5. If you made it past childhood, you could expect to live to maybe 30 or 35 years old on average, though some people did live longer. Still, by the time you reached your 20s, your body would already be worn down by hard labour and poor nutrition. The social structure was rigid and unchanging. At the top sat the king, then the nobility, lords, and knights. Below them were the merchants and craftsmen in the towns. and at the very bottom, where you find yourself, were the peasants. Your father was a peasant, his father was a peasant, your children will be peasants. There is no social mobility, no pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. The idea that you could better your situation through hard work would have been laughable. You worked yourself to exhaustion every day just to stay exactly where you were. The feudal contract was simple. The lord owned the land, you worked it. In exchange, he was supposed to provide protection from bandits and enemy armies, and theoretically he was supposed to care for you in times of famine or disaster. In practice, this protection was minimal, and his care was even less reliable. But you had no choice in the matter. This was the world you were born into, and this was the world you would die in. Your village was organised around the manor system. At the centre stood the Lord's manor house, a substantial building of stone or timber that would have seemed like a palace to you, though by noble standards it was modest. Around it clustered the peasant dwellings, small huts made of whatever materials were available. Beyond those lay the fields, divided into strips that were allocated to different families. The village also had common lands where everyone could graze their few animals, gather firewood, and forage for food. The medieval economy ran on agriculture. Everything revolved around the farming calendar, ploughing in autumn, sowing in spring, weeding and maintenance through the summer, harvest in late summer and early fall. And then the cycle began again. There were no weekends off, except for Sundays and the numerous holy days mandated by the church. But even on those days there was work to be done. Animals needed feeding, food needed preparing, firewood needed gathering. The work never really stopped. Justice was local and brutal. The Lord administered punishment for most crimes through his manor court. Stealing could result in losing a hand. Lying might get you the stocks or a public whipping. More serious crimes meant hanging. There was no police force, no lawyers for the poor, no concept of innocent until proven guilty. If you were accused, you were likely guilty, and the punishment was swift and public. The whole village would gather to watch, partly as a deterrent, partly as entertainment in a world where entertainment was scarce. The church was omnipresent. It controlled your calendar, your morality, your education if you received any, your birth, marriage, and death. Every Sunday you were required to attend Mass, conducted entirely in Latin, which you didn't understand. The priest was one of the few educated people in the village, and his interpretation of God's will was absolute. Questioning the church was dangerous. Heresy could get you burned at the stake, so you kept your head down, attended services, paid your tithes, and hoped that your suffering in this life would be rewarded in the next. This was your world. No electricity, no running water, no modern medicine, no education, no freedom, no comfort, no safety net if things went wrong, and things went wrong all the time. Crops failed, animals died, accidents happened, people got sick, and when disaster struck there was no one to help you but your family and neighbours, who were just as desperate as you were. So here you are, lying on your straw mattress as dawn breaks on what seems like just another day. The roosters are crowing. Light is beginning to filter through the gaps in your thatched roof. Your body aches from yesterday's work. You're cold despite the fact that you slept in all your clothes, which consist of one rough wool tunic that you've worn every day for months. Next to you, your spouse is stirring. On the other side of the single room, your children are waking up, and beyond them, separated by a thin woven barrier, you can hear your pig rooting around in its corner of the hut. The day is about to begin, and if you think your morning routine is bad, wait until you experience theirs. The church bell has just rung for Lauds, the morning prayer that marks the break of dawn. For you, this isn't a gentle reminder to start thinking about getting up. It's the signal that your workday has officially begun, and it began early. In the summer months, this could be as early as 3 or 4 in the morning. Right now, in late spring, it's perhaps 5. The sun is just starting to paint the sky with light, and there's no snooze button to hit. You open your eyes, and immediately you're aware of 3 things. First, you're cold. The fire in the hearth went out sometime during the night, and the late spring morning has a bite to it. Second, you're itching everywhere. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs have been feasting on you all night, as they do every night. You've never known a time when you weren't crawling with parasites. Everyone has them, from the lowest peasant to the king himself, though the nobles at least have the money for better treatments. And third, you're hungry. You went to bed hungry last night, and you'll start today hungry too, because the morning meal, when it comes, won't be nearly enough to satisfy the gnawing in your stomach. Your bed is not what you'd call comfortable. It's a rough wooden frame, if you're lucky enough to have one, stuffed with a mattress made of straw, hay, and whatever other plant material you could gather. There are no springs, no padding, just a scratchy, lumpy surface that provides minimal cushioning between your aching body and the hardwood below. The straw needs to be changed regularly because it gets infested with insects and starts to rot. But you haven't had time to do that lately, so it smells musty and feels damp. You don't have a pillow in the modern sense. Maybe you've bundled up some extra cloth or made a small sack of wool if you're one of the better-off peasants. More likely, you just rest your head on the mattress or on a folded-up piece of clothing. Your one blanket is a heavy woolen thing that has never been washed. It weighs on you like a dead animal and smells about the same. In the winter, this weight is welcome because it traps heat. In the warmer months, it's stifling, but you need it at night when the temperatures drop. The room you're in is the only room in your house. It measures perhaps 15 feet by 12 feet, though many peasant dwellings were even smaller. Everything happens in this space. Cooking, eating, sleeping, living, and yes, even basic bodily functions when the weather is too harsh to go outside. The walls are made of wattle and daub, which is exactly as medieval as it sounds. Long thin branches, usually willow or hazel, were woven together between vertical wooden posts to create a lattice framework. This wattle was then covered with daub, a mixture of wet soil, clay, straw, and animal dung that was plastered over both sides of the wattle and left to dry. When dry, wattle and daub creates a surprisingly sturdy wall, though it has significant drawbacks. It's not particularly good at keeping out the cold or the damp. Gaps appear as it ages, and the daub cracks. Mice and rats can gnaw through it. And it's extremely flammable, which is a serious concern when you have an open fire burning in the middle of your living space every day. The walls might be whitewashed with lime on the outside to give them some weather resistance and a cleaner appearance, but inside they're just brown and rough. The floor beneath you is packed earth, possibly covered with rushes or straw for a bit of insulation and comfort. These floor coverings are changed infrequently, and they hide all manner of filth. Food scraps fall into them. Spilled liquids soak into them, insects nest in them. When they're finally removed and new rushes are laid down, the stench that rises from the old ones is overpowering. But most of the time, you don't notice because you're accustomed to it. It's just the way everything smells. Above you, the roof is thatched with straw, reeds, or heather, depending on what's available locally. A good thatch can last 15 to 20 years if it's well maintained. But maintenance requires time and materials you often don't have. When it rains, the roof leaks. Not everywhere, and not always in the same places, but enough that you've learned where to position your few possessions and your sleeping area to avoid the worst of it. In heavy rain, you might have to put out bowls or buckets to catch the drips. There are no windows in your hut, or if there are, they're just small openings in the walls with wooden shutters. Glass is far too expensive for someone like you. Even in castles and manor houses, glass windows are a luxury. These openings let in a bit of light and air during the day, but they also let in cold, wind and rain, so they're often kept shuttered. This means your home is dark most of the time. The only light comes from the fire when it's burning, or on special occasions from a tallow candle, though these are too precious to burn regularly. The fire, when you have one going, burns in a hearth in the centre of the room. There is no chimney, just a hole in the roof to let the smoke out. In theory. In practice, much of the smoke lingers inside, filling the space with an acrid haze that makes your eyes water and your lungs burn. You've lived with this your entire life, so you barely notice anymore. but a visitor from the modern era would find it unbearable. The constant smoke exposure contributes to respiratory problems that plague medieval people, but there's no alternative. The fire is essential for heat and for cooking. Around the walls of your single room are your possessions, and they're pitifully few. A rough wooden table, probably just a plank laid across two supports, a couple of stools or benches, a large wooden chest where you keep your clothes, which means your one spare tunic if you have one, maybe an extra pair of hose, some rags that serve multiple purposes. Hanging from pegs on the walls might be your tools, a sickle for harvesting, a wooden rake, a spade with an iron blade if you're fortunate. Cooking pots made of clay or iron depending on what you can afford. In one corner of the room, separated by a woven hurdle or a rough wooden partition, are your livestock. Yes, your animals live with you. If you own a pig, and most peasants try to keep at least one, it lives in your house. Maybe you also have some chickens, though they might be outside in a small coop. The pig is valuable because it can be fed on scraps and will eventually provide meat, but in the meantime, it also provides warmth in the winter and a tremendous amount of mess and smell year-round. The pig's corner is covered in its own waste, which you clean out when you get around to it, which is not nearly as often as modern sensibilities would require. Your children are stirring now. You might have 3 or 4 living children, though you've probably lost at least 1 or 2 in infancy or early childhood. They sleep on their own straw mattresses on the floor, or if the house has a loft space, they might sleep up there, accessed by a ladder. The loft, if you have one, is even darker and smokier than the main room, and the risk of falling through rotted floorboards is real. But it does provide some separation and frees up floor space below. Your spouse is getting up, and this is when you remember that there is absolutely no privacy in a medieval peasant household. Everyone sees everything. Everyone hears everything. Intimate moments between husband and wife happen with your children sleeping just feet away. Dressing and undressing happens in full view of the family. There are no separate bedrooms, no bathroom doors to close, no personal space whatsoever. The entire concept of privacy is a modern invention that would have been incomprehensible to a medieval peasant. As you stand up, your joints crack and pop. You're only 25 years old, but your body feels much older. Years of physical labour have taken their toll. Your back aches constantly from bending over to work in the fields. Your knees are starting to go from all the kneeling and squatting. You probably have arthritis beginning to set in, though you don't know that word. You just know that you hurt, and you always hurt, and you expect to hurt more as you get older, until you eventually can't work anymore, at which point you'll become a burden on your family and probably die soon after. Your teeth, assuming you still have most of them, feel gritty and loose. You've never brushed them in your life. The concept doesn't exist for you. Maybe you've chewed on a green hazel twig to clean them a bit, which was a practice some people followed, but it's not a daily habit. Your gums are probably swollen and infected. Many of your teeth have cavities. By the time you're 40, if you live that long, you'll have lost several teeth, and eating will become increasingly difficult. Dental abscesses are common and can be fatal if the infection spreads. You're also aware, as you move around, that you smell. Not just smell a little, you reek. It's a combination of unwashed body odour, smoke from the constant fires, and the general filth of your environment. You haven't had a proper bath in months, possibly longer. The idea of bathing was more common in the earlier medieval period than popular myth suggests, but by the 14th century, and especially for poor peasants, regular bathing was rare. Water had to be hauled from a well or stream, heated over a fire which took forever, and then dumped into a wooden tub. The effort required was enormous, and you simply don't have time or energy for it. When you do wash, it's usually just your face, hands, and feet in cold water from a bucket. Maybe on Saturday evening before church on Sunday, you might make more of an effort, but it's still far from what we'd consider clean. Your skin is grimy, ingrained with dirt that won't come off with a simple splash of water. Your fingernails are broken and black with embedded filth. Your hair, which hasn't been washed in weeks or months, is greasy and matted, and it's crawling with lice and their eggs. everyone in your family is in the same condition, so you don't really notice each other's smell. It's when you're in close quarters with many other people, like at church or during communal work, that the combined stench becomes truly oppressive. But again, everyone smells, so it's just accepted as normal. The idea that you could or should smell differently simply doesn't exist in your worldview. Your clothing is as minimal as you can get away with while still being decent. You're wearing a long tunic made of rough wool or linen that reaches to your knees or lower. Under that you might have a linen undershift if you're lucky, which provides some protection between your skin and the scratchy wool. On your legs, you have hose, which are individual cloth leg coverings tied to your belt with strings. They're not particularly warm and often sag and wrinkle around your ankles. On your feet, if you have shoes, they're simple leather affairs, barely more than pieces of hide wrapped around your foot and tied with laces. But many peasants went barefoot for much of the year, saving their shoes for winter or important occasions. Walking barefoot through the village meant stepping in mud, animal waste, sharp stones, thorns, and all the various unpleasant things that littered the ground. Foot injuries were common, and any cut or scrape could easily become infected. Your belt is an important item because it holds up your hose and also serves as a place to hang small items. Maybe you have a small knife in a leather sheath, an essential tool for eating and general work. Maybe a small purse for carrying a few coins if you ever have any. The belt itself is just a strip of leather with a simple buckle. That's it. That's your entire wardrobe. You own one outfit which you wear every day until it literally falls apart. Washing clothes is nearly as big a production as bathing. Garments have to be taken to a stream or river, beaten against rocks with soap made from ash and animal fat, and then hung to dry. In wet weather, they might take days to dry, and you can't afford to be without your only set of clothes for that long, so you wear them dirty and they get dirtier. Getting dressed takes only moments because you slept in most of your clothes anyway. You never fully undressed. It's too cold for that. And there's no point. You just lay down in your tunic and woke up ready to face the day. Now you pull on your shoes if you have them, tie on your belt, make sure your hose are more or less staying up, and you're dressed. Your spouse is moving around the room now, stirring the embers of last night's fire, trying to coax them back to life. This is a crucial task because starting a fire from scratch is difficult and time-consuming. You need to strike a piece of flint against a piece of steel to create sparks, catch those sparks in tinder, which might be char cloth or dried moss, and then carefully blow on it to create a flame. Then you feed that flame with small twigs and gradually build up to larger pieces of wood. It's a skill that everyone must master, but it's much easier if you can keep the fire going from day to day. The children are being roused from sleep. Your oldest, who's maybe 8 years old, is already expected to help with chores. Medieval childhood was brief. By age 7 or 8, children were considered small adults and were put to work. Your daughter will spend the day helping her mother with household tasks, learning the skills she'll need when she has her own household. Your son will come with you to the fields, doing whatever tasks he's capable of. The younger children, assuming they've survived infancy, are more of a burden than a help at this age. They need constant supervision to keep them from hurting themselves or wandering off. But supervision in the modern sense doesn't really happen. They're simply expected to stay close and not cause too much trouble. Accidents happen frequently. Children fall into fires, drown in streams, are kicked by animals, or eat something poisonous. The death of a child is heartbreaking, but also grimly expected. You hope yours will survive, but you know the odds. As you prepare to face the day, your bladder is making its presence known. This brings us to one of the most unpleasant aspects of medieval peasant life, and that's what comes next. You need to relieve yourself, and this is not a pleasant experience in the medieval world. Let's start with the basic fact that there is no toilet in your house, no bathroom, no running water, no privacy, nothing even remotely resembling modern sanitation. What you have instead is a choice between several equally unappealing options. The most common solution for peasants was simply a latrine pit dug somewhere behind or beside the house. This is exactly what it sounds like. A hole in the ground, sometimes with a wooden structure built over it for minimal privacy and weather protection, but often just an open pit. You squat over it, do your business, and that's that. The pit fills up over time, and when it gets too full, it's supposed to be covered with earth and a new one dug elsewhere. In practice, this doesn't always happen on a sensible schedule. The smell emanating from these pits, especially in warm weather, is beyond description. It's a thick, cloying stench that permeates the area around it and attracts flies by the thousands. These flies then land on your food, on your face, on everything, spreading filth and disease. The connection between poor sanitation and illness is not understood in your time. The prevailing medical theory is that diseases are caused by bad air or miasma, which is partially correct in that bad smells often correlate with unsanitary conditions, but the mechanism of how germs spread is completely unknown. If the weather is particularly bad, stormy or freezing cold, you might use a chamber pot inside the house instead of venturing outside. This is a simple clay or wooden pot that you urinate or defecate into, and then someone, usually a woman or child, has to carry it outside and empty it. Where do they empty it? Into the pit if you have one close by, into the street if you live in a village or town, into the nearest stream or river, contaminating the water that downstream neighbours use for drinking, cooking and washing. In towns and cities, the sanitation problem is even worse because more people are packed into a smaller space. Urban dwellers often simply threw their waste out the window into the street below. There were laws against this in many places, and in some cities you were supposed to shout a warning like garde-l'eau, which comes from the French garde l'eau, meaning watch out for the water. But compliance was spotty, and getting hit with the contents of a chamber pot was a real risk when walking through town. The streets of medieval towns ran with filth, a mixture of human waste, animal waste, rotting food scraps, blood and offal from butchered animals, and general garbage all combined in the gutters and the street itself. When it rained, this all turned into a flowing river of sewage that eventually drained into local water sources. In dry weather, it dried into a crusty layer that got kicked up as dust. Either way, it was revolting. Some larger towns had public latrines, usually built over a river or stream, so that the waste would be carried away by the current. These public toilets were communal affairs where multiple people sat side by side on wooden benches with holes cut in them, all conducting their business together with minimal privacy. The Elizabethan writer Thomas Nash later described these as places where you could sit cheek by jowl with a farmer's wife, and indeed people from all social classes used them, though probably not at the same time. In castles and manor houses, the wealthy had garderobes, which were essentially small rooms with a shaft that dropped waist down to a pit or moat below. These were slightly more civilized than a peasant's outdoor pit, but they still stank, and the build-up of waste below had to be removed periodically by someone with the miserable job of mucking out the castle's sewage. These unfortunate workers were sometimes called gong farmers or rakers, and it was as terrible an occupation as it sounds. But you're not in a castle. You're a peasant, and your sanitation facilities are basic at best. So you pull on your shoes, if you have them, and head outside to the pit. It's still early and the air is chilly. Your breath mists in front of you. The village is coming to life around you. Other peasants are emerging from their huts, heading to their own pits, beginning their morning routines. The pit behind your house is partially enclosed by a screen of woven branches for some modesty, though anyone who glances in that direction can see what you're doing. You lower yourself into a squat, trying not to think about the massive waste below you, trying not to breathe too deeply, because the smell is overpowering. Flies are already buzzing around despite the cool morning air. You do what you need to do as quickly as possible, and now comes another unpleasant reality. There is no toilet paper. The concept won't exist for centuries. Instead, you use whatever is available. This might be leaves, if they're in season and you can gather some. Straw or hay, which is scratchy and not particularly effective. Old rags, which have to be washed and reused. Moss, if you can find it. Or sometimes you use the hand and water method. using your left hand to clean yourself and then rinsing it in a bucket of water. This is why the left hand was considered unclean in many cultures, and why eating with your left hand was seen as disgusting and improper. None of these methods are particularly hygienic or effective, and they contribute to the constant problem of intestinal parasites that plague medieval people. Parasitic worms are almost universal in this population. Tapeworms, roundworms, whipworms, pinworms, and others inhabit the intestines of nearly everyone, causing chronic discomfort, malnutrition, and in severe cases serious illness or death. You've had intestinal parasites for as long as you can remember. The occasional feeling of something moving in your belly is just part of life. For women, the sanitation situation is complicated further by menstruation. There are no sanitary products in the modern sense. Women use rags, which they wash and reuse, but these have to be discreet because menstruation is considered shameful and unclean. The concept of a woman on her period being impure is deeply embedded in medieval religious and social thought. Women are often excluded from certain religious ceremonies during their periods and are expected to hide the fact that they're menstruating as much as possible. The rags used during menstruation are kept private, washed separately, and never discussed openly. But in a one-room house where privacy doesn't exist, this secrecy is nearly impossible to maintain. Young girls are initiated into this aspect of womanhood with little preparation, often just being told by their mothers what to do when the time comes. The pain, discomfort, and inconvenience of menstruation without any pain relief, without the ability to rest, and without proper sanitary supplies is yet another burden medieval women carry. You finish your business at the pit, use whatever cleaning method you have available, and pull up your hose and tunic. Your hands are dirty now, contaminated with fecal matter no matter how careful you were. Ideally you would wash them with soap and hot water. In reality you might splash them with cold water from a bucket if there's one nearby, or you might just wipe them on your tunic and go about your day. This is how disease spreads, though you don't know that. You just know that people get sick a lot, and you attribute it to God's will or bad luck or the influence of the stars, anything but the actual cause, which is poor hygiene and contaminated everything. The water situation is another challenge. Your village has a well or a nearby stream that provides water for drinking, cooking, washing, and watering animals. This water source is also downstream from someone else's waste disposal, and it's also used by the animals that wallow in it, drink from it, and defecate in it. The water is not clean, not in any modern sense. It's teeming with bacteria, parasites, and all manner of pathogens. People do know that water can make them sick, though they don't understand why. The solution is to drink as little plain water as possible, and instead drink weak ale or beer. The brewing process involves boiling the water, which kills many of the dangerous organisms in it, and the slight alcohol content provides some preservation. So from childhood, everyone drinks ale. Not the strong high-alcohol beer of today, but a weak brew, maybe 2 to 3% alcohol, that's drunk throughout the day. This means that the entire population, including children, is in a mild state of intoxication much of the time. This is not enough to make you drunk, but it does mean that you're never quite at peak mental clarity either. It also means that a significant portion of the limited grain supply is diverted to brewing ale instead of making bread, which is a trade-off dictated by survival. Better to be slightly tipsy than dead from dysentery. The brewing is usually done by women, and it's an essential household task. If you run out of ale, you have to drink the water, and the water will likely make you sick. So there's always a barrel of ale fermenting somewhere, and the yeasty fermented smell is part of the general bouquet of odours that characterises your home. You head back inside after your trip to the pit, and your spouse has managed to get the fire going properly now. A small pot is hanging over the flames, and water is being heated for the morning meal, such as it is. The smoke is thick in the room, making your eyes water. You cough, a deep phlegmy cough that's been with you for years. Everyone coughs. Constant smoke inhalation, combined with damp living conditions, leads to chronic respiratory problems. Bronchitis, tuberculosis, and pneumonia are common killers. The children are huddled near the fire trying to warm themselves. The pig is making noise in its corner, demanding to be fed. The chickens outside, if you have them, are clucking and need to be let out. There's a moment where you just stand there, looking at your family, your home, your life, and the exhaustion of it all weighs on you. You're tired before the day has even begun. You're always tired. Sleep never seems to be enough because the physical demands on your body are relentless, but there's no time to dwell on this. Work waits. Fields need tending. Animals need caring for. Your Lord will expect his labour from you. And before any of that, you need to eat something, though calling it breakfast is generous. The morning meal in a peasant household is not breakfast as we understand it. There's no leisurely coffee and toast, no eggs and bacon, no cereal or oatmeal with brown sugar and fruit. What you have is whatever you managed to keep from yesterday, and it's not much. The staple of your diet, and really the staple of nearly everyone's diet in medieval England, is bread. But this bread bears little resemblance to what you buy at a grocery store today. For you, as a poor peasant, bread is made from the cheapest grains available, usually barley, rye, or a mixture called maslin. Wheat bread is for the wealthy. You rarely see it, much less eat it. The bread you eat is dark, dense, and coarse. It's made from flour that's ground at the Lord's mill, which you're required to use and for which you pay a fee. The mill is powered by water or wind, and it grinds the grain between two large stones. The resulting flour is gritty because small particles of stone inevitably get into it, and these particles gradually wear down your teeth over the years. By the time you're middle-aged, your teeth will be worn nearly flat from chewing stone-laced bread day after day. The bread itself is mixed with water, sometimes a bit of ale for leavening, and occasionally some salt if you can afford it. It's baked in a communal oven, another facility that belongs to the Lord and that you must pay to use. You're not allowed to bake bread in your own home, both because it's a fire hazard and because the Lord wants to maintain his monopoly on essential services. So you prepare your dough, take it to the communal oven when it's your turn, and hope that whoever's managing the oven that day doesn't burn it or steal a portion. When bread is fresh, it's at least edible, though still dense and heavy. But bread doesn't stay fresh for long, and you can't bake it every day. So most of the time you're eating bread that's several days old, which means it's gone hard as a rock. You have to soften it by dunking it in ale, water, or whatever liquid is available. Sometimes the bread gets mouldy, and you just brush off the worst of the mould and eat it anyway. You can't afford to waste food. In bad years, when grain is scarce because of poor harvests, the bread gets even worse. Desperate bakers bulk it up with whatever they can find. Ground acorns, dried and ground peas or beans, sawdust. In the worst times, even clay or chalk dust might be added to stretch the limited flour supply. This adulterated bread is barely digestible and provides even less nutrition than regular bread, but it's filling in the sense that it occupies space in your stomach. Then there's the danger of ergot, a fungus that grows on rye in damp conditions. Ergot-contaminated grain produces bread that causes a condition called St. Anthony's fire, which results in hallucinations, seizures, gangrene, and death. Outbreaks of ergot poisoning occur periodically when weather conditions favour the fungus, and when people are desperate enough to eat anything. You don't know about ergot, of course. You just know that sometimes the bread makes people sick in terrible ways, and you pray that this year's harvest is clean. Along with the bread, your breakfast might include some of the previous night's pottage. Pottage is the other cornerstone of peasant diet, and it deserves a detailed description because you'll be eating a lot of it. Pottage is essentially a thick soup or stew made in a large pot that hangs over your fire. Into this pot goes whatever you have available. This typically means dried peas, beans, or lentils, which are your main source of protein in the absence of meat. Various vegetables depending on the season. In spring and summer, you might have onions, leeks, cabbage, beets, and turnips. In autumn, there might be carrots and parsnips. In winter, you're relying on whatever you manage to store from the harvest, which means mostly dried beans and the hardiest root vegetables. The vegetables are chopped and thrown into the pot with water, or if you're lucky, some stock. The mixture is cooked for hours until everything breaks down into a thick, mushy consistency. If you have any herbs, maybe some parsley or thyme from a small garden plot, you add those for flavour. Salt is precious and expensive, so you use it sparingly if at all. Most of the time, your pottage is quite bland. Meat is a luxury that appears in your pottage rarely. Beef is almost unknown to you. Cattle are valuable for ploughing and for dairy, so they're only slaughtered when they're old and past usefulness. And when they are, the meat goes to the Lord's table, not yours. Mutton is similarly rare. Sheep are kept for wool, and while you might get to eat mutton occasionally, usually from an animal that died or from one of the culls in autumn, it's not a regular feature of your diet. Pork is more accessible to peasants because pigs are relatively easy to keep. You can let them forage in the woods, feeding on acorns and whatever else they can find, and they don't require much care. Most peasant families try to keep a pig, and in late autumn, when food becomes scarce and it's time to slaughter animals before winter, the pig is killed, butchered, and every part is used. The meat is salted or smoked to preserve it, and these preserved meats are doled out in tiny portions over the following months. A small piece of bacon or salt pork might be added to your pottage for flavour, and that's a treat. Blood is saved to make blood sausage or black pudding. Intestines are cleaned and used as sausage casings. Bones are boiled for stock. Lard is rendered and saved for cooking. Nothing is wasted because you literally cannot afford to waste anything. But these meat meals are few and far between. Most days your pottage is vegetarian by necessity, not by choice. You're not getting enough protein, and you're not getting enough calories to match the enormous physical demands of your work. Chronic mild malnutrition is the norm. You're always at least a little bit hungry. Your body's running at a deficit, and it shows in your stunted growth, your low body weight, and your constant fatigue. This morning you're spooning cold pottage from yesterday into a wooden bowl. There's no refrigeration, so food is preserved by keeping it hot on the fire, or by salting it, or by accepting that it's going to spoil and eating it before it does. This pottage has been sitting overnight, and it's developed a skin on top, but underneath it's still edible. You share it with your family, each person getting a portion. The children eat first because they need to grow, and then the adults eat whatever's left. You eat with a wooden spoon if you have one, or you might just drink the pottage directly from the bowl. There are no plates, no napkins, no silverware beyond maybe a knife. You eat quickly because there's work to do, and because lingering over a meal is a luxury you can't afford. Meals are structured around the church's requirements. There are numerous fast days throughout the year when eating meat is forbidden. Fridays are always meat-free, as are the 40 days of Lent and various other holy days. On these days you're supposed to eat fish instead, but fish is not always available or affordable. If you live near the coast or a good river, you might be able to catch some fish, but fishing rights are often controlled by the Lord, and you're restricted in where and when you can fish. Salted or dried fish, especially herring, is sometimes available and more affordable than fresh fish, but it's still a strain on your limited resources. Many peasants simply eat their usual meatless pottage on fast days and don't worry too much about fish. The church's rules are strict, but enforcement at the peasant level is inconsistent. As long as you show up to church, pay your tithes, and don't openly defy the priests, a bit of laxity in your observance of fast days might be overlooked. What you never eat is fruit, except occasionally in late summer and autumn when local berries, apples, and pears are in season. Fruit is a treat, not a staple, and what little grows in your area is often claimed by the Lord, or has to be shared among so many people that you only get a small taste. Imported fruits like oranges or figs are completely beyond your reach, reserved for the tables of the wealthy. Your diet lacks essential vitamins and nutrients. Vitamin C deficiency, which causes scurvy, is common, though the symptoms are attributed to other causes. Anemia from lack of iron is widespread, especially among women who lose blood through menstruation and childbirth. Vitamin D deficiency is almost universal because you're not getting enough sunlight on your skin, you're wearing clothes most of the time, and you're working under a sun that, in Northern Europe, is often weak and hidden behind clouds. The one beverage that accompanies every meal is ale, as discussed earlier. You drink it from a wooden cup, leather tankard, or pottery mug. The ale is slightly sour, not particularly strong and not especially pleasant, but it's better than the water, so you drink it without complaint. As you finish your meagre breakfast, you're acutely aware that what you've eaten is not enough. Your stomach still feels empty, but there's no more food available right now. The next meal, the main meal of the day, won't come until midday, and even that won't be sufficient. You'll go to bed tonight hungry, just as you woke up this morning hungry. Hunger is the background noise of your existence, always present, never fully satisfied. Your children are scraping the last bits of pottage from their bowls. Your spouse is already cleaning up, preparing for the day's work. The pig needs feeding, so scraps are collected and dumped into the pig's corner, where it roots through them enthusiastically. The chickens need to be let out to forage. The fire needs to be built up to keep the home warm and to have it ready for the midday cooking. And then, once these tasks are done, it's time to leave the relative shelter of your hut and head out into the fields. This is where the real work begins. The work that defines your life. The work that will break your body long before you're old. Before we follow you into the fields, let's linger a moment longer on your dwelling itself. Because understanding the medieval peasant house is crucial to understanding why this life would be unbearable for someone from the modern world. Your home is not a sanctuary. It's not a comfortable retreat. It's barely adequate as shelter, and in many ways it's part of the problem rather than the solution. The hut you live in was probably built by your father, or perhaps you built it yourself when you married and established your own household. The construction method is universal across peasant Europe. Wattle and daub. We've touched on this already, but the process deserves fuller explanation because it reveals both the ingenuity and the limitations of medieval peasant life. The first step in building a wia, or wattle and daub house, is to create a wooden frame. This requires timber, which is not freely available. Trees belong to the lord, and cutting them without permission is a serious crime. You might be allowed to gather fallen branches, or there might be specific areas where peasants can take wood for building, but substantial timber for the frame posts is a precious resource. Many peasants use timber from previous buildings that have collapsed or been abandoned, salvaging what they can. The frame consists of vertical posts driven into the ground or resting on flat stones to prevent rot. Horizontal beams connect these posts at the top, creating a rectangular outline. The roof is created with a simple triangular frame, often using naturally curved timbers in what's called crook construction, where pairs of curved timbers form an A shape that supports the weight of the thatch. Once the frame is in place, the wattle and daub process begins. Thin branches, usually hazel or willow, are woven between the vertical posts, creating a basket-like lattice. This requires skill and patience. The branches must be fresh and flexible enough to weave, but not so green that they'll shrink excessively as they dry. The weaving creates a stable surface that will support the daub. The daub mixture is made from whatever materials are locally available. Clay, if you have it, forms the base. This is mixed with water to create a thick mud. To this, you add straw for binding and insulation. You also add animal dung, usually from cattle or horses. The dung contains fibres that help hold the mixture together, and surprisingly, it doesn't smell much once it dries. Some builders also add lime if they can get it, which helps the daub set harder and provide some water resistance. This mixture is applied to both sides of the wattle, working it into the lattice and building up a layer several inches thick. The process is done by hand, and it's messy, cold work, especially if you're building in autumn or spring when the weather is uncooperative. Once applied, the daub needs to dry, which takes weeks depending on the weather. As it dries, it hardens into a solid wall. The finished wall is reasonably effective, but it has significant drawbacks. Wattle and daub is porous, so moisture from rain and damp air gradually penetrates it. In wet climates like England, this means your walls are damp much of the time. contributing to a clammy, unpleasant atmosphere inside the house. The daub also cracks as it dries and as the house settles, creating gaps that let in wind, cold, and vermin. Rodents are a constant problem. Mice and rats can gnaw through daub eventually, and they nest in the thatch above your head. You can hear them at night, scurrying around, occasionally dropping bits of straw or worse onto you as you try to sleep. Rats carry fleas, and those fleas carry disease, including the plague, though the connection won't be understood for centuries. The roof is a separate challenge. Thatching requires skill and the right materials. If you live in an area with good reed beds, reed thatch is superior and lasts longer. Otherwise, you use straw or heather. The thatch is bundled and tied to the roof frame in overlapping layers, starting at the bottom and working up. A well-done thatch can shed water effectively and provide good insulation, but thatch has problems. It's a fire hazard, and in a village where every house has an open fire, house fires are common. When one thatched house catches fire, it often spreads to neighbouring houses and entire villages can burn down. There are records of villages being destroyed by fire multiple times, each time rebuilt in the same way because there's no alternative. Thatch also harbours insects. Birds nest in it, and it gradually breaks down, requiring regular maintenance. Replacing a roof is expensive in time and materials, so many peasants delay the work until the roof is leaking badly, making the interior of the house even damper and more unpleasant. Inside your single room, the atmosphere is oppressive. The smoke from the fire never fully clears because there's no proper chimney. Your eyes burn, your throat is scratchy, everything smells of smoke. Your clothes, your hair, your bedding, all permeated with the acrid smell of wood smoke. This smoke does serve one useful purpose. It helps preserve the thatch and keep some insects away, but the cost to your respiratory health is significant. The earthen floor is cold and damp. Water seeps up from the ground, especially in wet weather, making the floor muddy. The rushes or straw that cover it help somewhat, but they also absorb moisture and create a breeding ground for mould and insects. When these floor coverings are changed, usually once or twice a year, the accumulated filth beneath them is shocking. Rotting food, animal droppings, spilled liquids, all compressed into a stinking mat that has to be scraped up and carted away. Furniture, as we've noted, is minimal. Your table and stools are roughly made, unfinished wood. There's no padding, no cushions. Sitting for long periods is uncomfortable, but you rarely sit anyway. Your chest for storage is the one piece of furniture you guard carefully, because it holds everything you own. A good wooden chest with a lock is valuable, and might be one of the few things you could pass down to your children. Light is a constant problem. During the day, the house is dim because of the lack of windows. At night, it's nearly pitch black. Candles are expensive, made from tallow, which is rendered animal fat, and they smoke and smell. You might light one for special occasions, but mostly you go to bed when it gets dark and rise when the sun comes up. Your life is governed by natural light, and in winter, the days are short and the nights are long. The lack of light also means you can't do detailed work after dark. No reading, not that you could read anyway. No sewing or mending by candlelight. Just sitting in the dark, perhaps talking with your family, but more often just sleeping because there's nothing else to do and because you're exhausted. In winter, the house is brutally cold. The fire provides some warmth, but it can't heat the entire space. The cold radiates from the walls. Drafts come through the gaps in the daub and around the door. You pile on all the clothing you have, wrap yourself in your blanket, and still you shiver. Frostbite on fingers and toes is common. People die of exposure in their own homes during the worst cold snaps. In summer, the house is stifling. The thatch insulates against heat as well as cold. But the lack of ventilation means the air inside is hot, stuffy, and thick with flies. The smell intensifies. The pig's corner is ripe. Everyone's body odour is amplified. It's almost unbearable, but you have no choice. You live here because you have nowhere else to go. The single room serves all purposes. This is where you cook, eat, sleep, live, give birth, care for the sick, and lay out the dead. There are no separate spaces for different activities. When someone is ill, and someone is usually at least a little ill, they lie on their mattress in the corner while the family goes about its business around them. Privacy for bodily functions, as we've discussed, doesn't exist. Every aspect of life is communal, whether you want it to be or not. When a woman gives birth, it happens right here in this room. Other women from the village might come to help, and a midwife if you can afford one, but they crowd into this small space, and the labour and delivery occur surrounded by your other children, your animals, and all the usual chaos of household life. The mortality rate for both mothers and infants is horrifically high, and many women fear childbirth as a potential death sentence. When someone dies, which happens far too often, the body is laid out in the same room where the living continue to function. There's no funeral home, no mortuary. The dead stay with the family until burial can be arranged, usually within a day or two, because without embalming or refrigeration, decay sets in quickly. The sight and smell of death are familiar to everyone from an early age. Your house is not a place of comfort or safety. It's a place where you try to survive the elements and catch a few hours of sleep between work shifts. It offers minimal protection from the weather, none from disease, and no privacy whatsoever. You would trade it in an instant for even the most basic modern apartment, with its separate rooms, its running water, its heating and cooling, its light switches and its locks. But you can't trade it because this is all there is. This is your home, such as it is, and it's better than being homeless, which is the alternative. So you accept it, you maintain it as best you can, and you try not to think too hard about how grim it all is. Now it's time to leave this shelter and head into the fields, where the truly backbreaking labour awaits. The work of a medieval peasant is defined by agriculture, and agriculture in the 14th century is defined by brutal physical labour with primitive tools. There are no tractors, no combines, no irrigation systems. Everything is done by human and animal muscle, and the humans are you. Your work schedule is dictated by the agricultural calendar and by your obligations to your lord. As a villain, you owe him labour service several days a week, typically 3 days, though this varies depending on local customs and the specific arrangements of your manor. These are called week work, and they're mandatory. You must work his land, tend his crops, repair his buildings, do whatever he requires. You're not paid for this. It's the price of being allowed to live on his land and farm your own small plot. In addition to week work, there are also boon works, which are extra labour obligations at critical times like planting and harvest. During harvest, you might be required to work on the Lord's fields every day until the work is done. Your own crops can wait, even if they're at risk of spoiling. The Lord's needs come first. This system ensures that the Lord's land is always well tended while your own plot struggles, along with whatever time and energy you have left over. The workday begins at dawn. You've eaten your meagre breakfast, and now you gather your tools and head to the fields. If you're working on the Lord's land today, you walk to his domain, the portion of the manor that he keeps for himself. If it's a day you can work your own land, you head to the village fields, which are organised in an open field system. The open field system is an ingenious solution to the problem of dividing land among many families, while ensuring that everyone has access to both good and poor soil. The village's arable land is divided into 3 large fields. One field is planted with winter crops like wheat or rye, sown in autumn and harvested in summer. Another field is planted with spring crops like barley, oats, and legumes, sown in spring and harvested in a late summer. The third field lies fallow, meaning it's left unplanted to recover its fertility. Each family has strips of land in each of the 3 fields, ensuring that everyone shares equally in the good and bad land. Your strips are not next to each other, they're scattered throughout the fields. This means you spend a lot of time walking between your various strips, but it also means crop failure in one area doesn't wipe you out completely. The tools you use are simple and inefficient. Your primary tool is a wooden plough, though if you're working the Lord's fields, he might have a better plough with an iron blade. The peasant plough, called an aird in earlier periods and gradually replaced by the heavier mouldboard plough, is pulled by oxen if you have them, or by humans if you don't. Ploughing is exhausting work. The plough is heavy, the ground is often hard and rocky, and you're walking behind it all day, guiding it, keeping it straight, struggling when it hits an obstacle. If you don't own an ox, which most peasants don't, you have to team up with neighbours to share animals and labour. This requires cooperation and trust, which sometimes exists and sometimes doesn't. Disputes over whose ox is working harder or who's contributing more labour are common, and these disputes can turn into feuds that last generations. Once the land is ploughed, it must be harrowed, which means dragging a heavy wooden frame with spikes over the ploughed earth to break up the clods and create a smoother surface for planting. This is another exhausting task, often done by hand when animals aren't available. Then comes planting. Seeds are broadcast by hand, scattered over the prepared soil. This is inefficient because many seeds don't land in good soil, many are eaten by birds, and spacing is irregular. But it's the method available to you, so you do it. After broadcasting, you harrow again to cover the seeds with soil. Now begins the long wait for the crops to grow, but it's not a passive wait. You must weed constantly. Weeds compete with your crops for nutrients and water, and if left unchecked, they can reduce your yield significantly. Weeding means bending over for hours, pulling out unwanted plants by hand, your back screaming in pain, the sun beating down on you in summer, or the cold wind cutting through you in spring. You must also protect your crops from animals. Birds are a constant threat, pecking at seeds and young shoots. Children are often assigned to bird scaring duty, standing in the fields and shouting, waving sticks, throwing stones at any crow or starling that comes near. It's tedious work for the children, but it's important. Larger animals are even more dangerous. If a deer gets into the field, it can devastate a growing crop in a single night. Pigs rooting around can tear up rows of plants. Cattle, if they escape their enclosure, will happily eat your entire field. Fencing is difficult and expensive, so preventing animal damage requires constant vigilance. Throughout the growing season, you pray for good weather. Too much rain and the crops rot or are beaten down by storms. Too little rain and they wither. A late frost in spring can kill tender shoots. An early frost in autumn can destroy the harvest before you can bring it in. Hailstorms, which are not uncommon, can flatten an entire field in minutes. You have no control over any of this, and there's no crop insurance, no government relief. If the weather ruins your crop, you starve. Harvest time, from late July through October depending on the crop, is the most intense period of the year. Everything must be brought in as quickly as possible. Grain that's left in the field too long can spoil or be lost to weather. The Lord's crops are harvested first, with all available labour mobilised for his fields. Only then can you harvest your own. Harvesting grain means cutting it with a sickle or scythe. The sickle is a short, curved blade that requires you to bend over and cut the stalks low to the ground. This is excruciating for your back, and you do it for hours, moving slowly across your strip, cutting and bundling the grain into sheaves. The scythe, with its longer handle, is somewhat easier on your back, but it requires more skill to use effectively, and not everyone has access to one. Once cut, the grain must be bound into sheaves and shocked, which means standing the sheaves upright in groups so they can dry. After drying, the sheaves are carted to the Lord's barn, or to a communal area, where the next stage of processing begins. Threshing is the process of separating the grain kernels from the stalks and husks. This is done by beating the sheaves with a flail, a wooden tool consisting of a long handle with a shorter, heavier piece attached by a leather thong. You swing the flail down onto the grain repeatedly, a rhythmic, exhausting motion that goes on for hours. The impact separates the grain from the chaff. Once threshed, the grain must be winnowed, which means tossing it into the air so the wind blows away the lighter chaff, while the heavier grain falls back down. This is skilled work, requiring the right wind conditions and a good sense of timing. After winnowing, the grain is bagged and stored, either in the Lord's storage or, if it's from your own fields, in your home. But before you can store it, remember, you owe a portion to the Lord as rent and another tenth to the church as your tithe. After these obligations are met, what remains is yours to feed your family for the year. If it's not enough, which it often isn't, you're in trouble. You might be able to buy additional grain, but that requires money you probably don't have. Or you might have to borrow, going into debt that will take years to repay, or you simply go hungry until the next harvest. In addition to field work, there are countless other tasks that fill your days. You must maintain the ditches that drain water from the fields. You must repair fences and gates. You must clear brush and stones from new areas being brought into cultivation. In the Lord's woods, you might be required to gather fallen branches for his fires, or to help with timber cutting when he's building or repairing something. You're also responsible for maintaining the roads and paths through the manor. This means filling in ruts, cutting back overgrown vegetation, and making sure bridges and fords are passable. This work is mandatory and unpaid, yet another demand on your limited time. If you have animals, which most peasants do, they require daily care. Your ox, if you're fortunate enough to own one, must be fed, watered, and groomed. In winter, when there's no grazing, you must provide it with hay and grain, which cuts into your own food supply. Your pig must be fed scraps and whatever forage it can find. Your chickens need to be let out in the morning and shut up at night, to protect them from foxes. Women's work is equally demanding, though it's often undervalued. Peasant women work in the fields alongside the men, doing most of the same tasks except for the heaviest ploughing. But in addition to field work, women are responsible for all the household labour. This means cooking, which involves fetching water, maintaining the fire, preparing ingredients, and cooking the meals. It means cleaning, which is a losing battle against the dirt and smoke of daily life. Women also do the brewing, turning grain and water into the ale that everyone drinks. This is a multi-day process that requires skill and attention. Women tend the vegetable gardens that most families maintain near their homes, growing onions, leeks, cabbage, and herbs. These gardens provide essential variety to the diet and are the woman's responsibility to plant, weed, and harvest. Women also do all the textile work. Wool from sheep must be cleaned, carded to align the fibres, spun into thread using a drop spindle or spinning wheel if you're lucky, and then woven or knitted into fabric. This fabric is then cut and sewn into clothing for the family. Every piece of clothing you own was made by hand, thread by thread, and it represents hundreds of hours of labour, mostly done by women after their other work is finished for the day. Childcare, of course, is also women's work. Babies and toddlers must be fed, changed, watched, and kept safe, all while the mother is also doing every other task. Many women strap their babies to their backs and carry them while working. Older children help with tasks, but someone must supervise them, and that someone is usually the mother or an older sibling. The sheer volume of work that a medieval peasant family must do is staggering. There are no days off, no vacations, no retirement. You work from the time you can walk until the day you die, or become too sick or injured to work, at which point you become a burden on your family. There's no pension, no social security, no nursing home. You're only valuable as long as you can work, and when you can't work anymore, you fade away quickly. The physical toll is immense. By your mid-20s, your body's breaking down. Chronic back pain is universal from all the bending and lifting. Arthritis sets in from working in cold, wet conditions. Injuries are common and often permanent. A broken bone that doesn't heal properly, a sprain that never fully recovers, a cut that gets infected, all these can leave you crippled and unable to work effectively. And yet you keep going because there's no alternative. If you don't work, you don't eat, and your family doesn't eat. The cycle is relentless, and the only escape is death. In the medieval world, health is precarious and death is ever present. Modern medicine doesn't exist. Germ theory won't be discovered for centuries. The concept of hygiene as we understand it is absent, and the treatments available range from useless to actively harmful. Disease in medieval England is endemic. Everyone is sick to some degree all the time. Intestinal parasites, as we've mentioned, are nearly universal. These worms live in your digestive tract, consuming nutrients meant for you, causing chronic discomfort and in severe cases causing serious illness or death, especially in children. Passing worms in your stool is so common it's barely remarked upon. Skin conditions are rampant. The combination of poor hygiene, constant exposure to dirt and the presence of vermin means that rashes, sores and infections are normal. Scabies, caused by mites burrowing under your skin, is extremely common and causes intense itching. Impetigo, ringworm, and other bacterial and fungal infections spread easily in the crowded, dirty conditions of peasant life. Lice and fleas are everywhere, biting constantly, causing irritation and spreading disease. The bubonic plague, which will strike England devastatingly in 1348, is carried by fleas that live on rats. But even before the plague, fleas spread typhus and other illnesses. Lice spread typhus, relapsing fever, and trench fever. You're constantly scratching, constantly uncomfortable, and there's nothing you can do about it except periodically pick lice from your hair and clothing and crush them. Respiratory diseases are major killers. Tuberculosis, known as consumption, is widespread and fatal. It spreads easily in crowded living conditions and causes a slow, wasting death. You cough up blood, lose weight, develop fevers and night sweats, and gradually waste away over months or years. There's no treatment, and if you contract it, you almost certainly die, infecting family members in the process. Pneumonia kills many, especially children and the elderly. A simple cold can develop into pneumonia, and without antibiotics, there's nothing to be done except hope and pray. Bronchitis is chronic among people who live in smoky houses and work in dusty fields. Everyone has a cough. Everyone's lungs are compromised. Diarrheal diseases are another major killer. Dysentery, cholera and typhoid fever spread through contaminated water and food, causing severe, often fatal diarrhea. Dehydration kills quickly, especially in children. You've lost siblings to the flux, as it's called, and you've seen neighbours' children die within days of becoming ill. The connection between dirty water and disease is not understood, so these illnesses are attributed to God's will or bad air. Malaria, though not as common in England as in southern Europe, does occur in marshy areas. The disease causes recurring fevers, chills and weakness. People call it the ague or marsh fever, not understanding that it's spread by mosquitoes. Those who survive repeated bouts are left weakened and more susceptible to other illnesses. Leprosy is one of the most feared diseases of the medieval period. It causes progressive disfigurement and disability, and lepers are social outcasts forced to live, apart from society in leper houses or colonies. The disease is thought to be highly contagious, though in reality it's not easily transmitted. Still, the sight of a leper with rotting flesh and missing extremities terrifies everyone, and lepers are required to carry bells or clappers to warn people of their approach. Smallpox and measles strike in waves, killing many children. Those who survive smallpox are often left scarred and sometimes blind. Measles, which can cause severe complications including pneumonia and encephalitis, is another childhood killer. Rubella, mumps and other viral diseases circulate regularly, and there's no immunity except from having survived them once. Dental problems are universal and excruciating. Tooth decay progresses unchecked until teeth abscess, causing terrible pain. An abscessed tooth can kill you if the infection spreads to your brain or bloodstream. The only treatment is extraction, which is done by the local blacksmith or barber surgeon with no anaesthesia. Holding the patient down, forcing their mouth open, and yanking out the infected tooth with crude forceps is as medieval as it gets. Many people die from complications of tooth infections. Injuries from accidents are common and often have serious consequences. In agricultural work, you're constantly at risk of cuts from sharp tools, being kicked by animals, falling from heights, or being injured by heavy equipment. A deep cut can lead to infection and sepsis. A broken bone, if it doesn't heal straight, can leave you crippled. Amputations are sometimes necessary for severe injuries or infections, and they're done with a saw and cauterizing iron, again with no anesthesia. The survival rate is not good. When you fall ill, what treatments are available? Medieval medicine is based on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These humours must be in balance for good health. If you're sick, it's because your humours are out of balance. Treatments are designed to restore balance, but they're based on completely incorrect understanding of the body. Bloodletting is a common treatment for almost any illness. The theory is that you have too much blood, so removing some will restore balance. This is done by opening a vein, usually in the arm, and letting blood drain into a bowl. Or it's done with leeches, which are applied to the skin and allowed to feed on your blood. In reality, bloodletting weakens an already sick person and probably kills more people than it helps. Purging, meaning inducing vomiting or diarrhea, is another popular treatment. You're given herbs or compounds that cause you to violently empty your stomach and bowels. The idea is that you're expelling the excess humour that's making you sick. In practice, you're being made even more ill through dehydration and loss of nutrients. Cupping involves placing heated glass or metal cups on the skin, creating a vacuum that draws blood to the surface. This is supposed to draw out bad humours. It leaves circular bruises and does nothing helpful. The local healer, often a woman with knowledge of herbs passed down through generations, might prescribe various plant remedies. Some of these, like willow bark for pain, or certain herbs for digestive issues, do have genuine medicinal properties. But many are useless, or based on the doctrine of signatures, the belief that God created plants that resemble the body parts they're meant to treat. So walnuts, which supposedly look like brains, are used for head ailments. This is superstition, not medicine. If you're seriously ill, a physician might be called, but physicians are expensive and rarely available to peasants. Physicians have university training, but their training is based on ancient texts by Galen and Hippocrates that are centuries old and often wrong. A physician will diagnose your imbalance of humours, prescribe bloodletting or purging, and possibly prepare a complex prescription of herbs and minerals. You'll pay for this, and you probably won't get better. Surgery is a last resort and is performed by barber surgeons, not physicians. Barber surgeons learned their trade through apprenticeship, not university. They can set bones, stitch wounds, amputate limbs, and perform other basic procedures. But without anesthesia, antiseptics, or understanding of infection, surgery is agonizing and often fatal. The patient is held down, given wine or opium if available, and operated on while conscious. The screaming is part of the process. There's no understanding of germs or how infection spreads. Doctors don't wash their hands. Instruments aren't sterilized. The same tools are used on multiple patients without cleaning. Pus is thought to be a sign of healing, laudable pus, rather than a sign of infection. So infections are encouraged and many patients die of sepsis. Pain relief is limited. Opium, derived from poppies, is available but expensive and not widely used among peasants. Alcohol provides some pain relief, but it's not very effective for severe pain. Mostly you just endure. Childbirth, surgery, dental extraction, broken bones, all endured without effective anesthesia. Childbirth deserves special mention as one of the most dangerous experiences a woman faces. Women give birth at home, attended by a midwife if they can afford one, or by other women from the village. The mortality rate for mothers is roughly 1 to 2% per birth, which might not sound high until you realise that women often have 5 to 10 pregnancies over their lives. Over the course of multiple births, the risk adds up. Roughly 20% of women die in childbirth or from childbirth-related complications. Labour complications like breech births, prolonged labour, or hemorrhaging often result in death because there's no way to intervene effectively. Caesarean sections are performed only in desperation, and the mother almost always dies. Infections after childbirth, puerperal fever, are common and often fatal. The newborn survival is also uncertain. Roughly half of infants die before age 5 from disease, malnutrition, accidents, or complications from birth. The omnipresence of death shapes medieval psychology. You've seen death many times. You've lost siblings, possibly a child of your own, neighbours, friends. Death is not abstract, it's familiar. Bodies are laid out in homes. Funerals are frequent. Graveyards are full and overflowing. In some places, bones are dug up to make room for new burials. The Black Death, when it comes in 1348, will kill between a third and a half of the population. Entire villages will be wiped out. But even in the years leading up to it, life expectancy is short. Average life expectancy at birth is roughly 30 to 35 years, dragged down by high infant mortality. If you survive childhood, you might live into your 40s or 50s, but that's still young by modern standards. Very few people live to be elderly as we understand it. This constant proximity to death influences everything. Religion becomes critical because the afterlife is all you have to hope for. The church preaches that your suffering in this life will be rewarded in the next if you're faithful. This gives people a reason to endure, but it also keeps them docile, accepting their lot rather than rebelling against it. The medieval church is not just a religious institution. It's the organising principle of all life. It controls your calendar, your morality, your education if you receive any, your birth, your marriage, and your death. You cannot escape its influence. Even if you wanted to, which you don't because questioning the church is dangerous, its authority is total and unquestionable. Your day begins and ends with the sound of church bells. The bells ring for each of the canonical hours, matins in the middle of the night, lauds at dawn, prime at the first hour, terce at the third hour, sext at midday, none in the afternoon, vespers in the evening, and compline before bed. These bells regulate time in a world without clocks. They tell you when to pray, when to work, and when to rest. Every Sunday, you're required to attend Mass. There's no concept of separation of church and state, no freedom to not attend. If you don't show up, you'll be noticed and questioned. Persistent absence can result in punishment, social ostracism, or accusation of heresy. So you go, no matter how tired, no matter how much work you have waiting. The Mass is conducted entirely in Latin, a language you don't understand. The priest chants and performs rituals at the altar while you stand in the nave of the church. There are no pews for peasants. Those are reserved for the wealthy. You stand for the entire service, which can last an hour or more. Your back aches, your feet hurt, but you endure because this is what God requires. You can't read, and even if you could, you wouldn't have access to a Bible. Bibles are handwritten, extremely expensive, and kept in the church or in the homes of the wealthy. The Bible is in Latin anyway. The church teaches that only educated clergy can properly interpret Scripture. Your job is to listen, obey, and accept what you're told. The church building itself is the most impressive structure you've ever seen. While your home is a drafty hut, the church is made of stone, with a high ceiling, glass windows, and elaborate decorations. This grandeur is intentional. It's meant to inspire awe and remind you of God's glory and the church's power. When you enter the church, you're supposed to feel small and insignificant, and you do. The priest is one of the few educated people in the village. He can read and write, at least enough to conduct services. He's nominally celibate, though in practice, many priests have relationships with women and children that everyone knows about, but doesn't openly discuss. The priest's authority is immense. He can bless, he can curse, he can withhold sacraments, and he can report you to higher church authorities if you displease him. The sacraments control the major moments of your life. Baptism must occur within days of birth because unbaptized babies go to limbo if they die, unable to enter heaven. Confirmation happens in childhood. Marriage is a sacrament performed by the priest. Penance requires you to confess your sins regularly, and the priest assigns penances, usually prayers or fasting, to absolve you. The Eucharist, the bread and wine that transforms into the body and blood of Christ, is the most sacred ritual. An extreme unction, The last rites are given to the dying to prepare their soul for judgment. Missing or being denied any of these sacraments has eternal consequences. Dying without last rites means your soul might be lost. So you need the priest, you need the church, and they know it. The church also controls your marriage. You cannot marry without the priest's blessing. He can refuse to marry you if he disapproves. Marriage among peasants is less formal than among the nobility, often just a public declaration and a blessing, but it's still under church authority. Divorce doesn't exist. Once married, you're bound for life, unless you can get an annulment, which is difficult and expensive. The church's control extends to your sex life. Sex is only permitted within marriage and only for procreation. Enjoying sex is considered sinful. Any form of contraception is forbidden. Masturbation is a sin. Homosexuality is a grave sin punishable by death. Even within marriage, sex during fast days, holy days, during menstruation, during pregnancy, or while nursing is prohibited. The church's ideal is celibacy, and anything else is tolerated only for the purpose of producing children. Tithes are mandatory. You owe 10% of everything you produce to the church. This includes grain, vegetables, eggs, animals, anything of value. The tithe is collected by the priest and stored in huge tithe barns. This takes a significant portion of your already limited resources. You resent it, but you pay because refusing means excommunication, social death, and the threat of eternal damnation. The church also demands labour. You must work on church land, maintain the church building, and perform various services for the priest. This is in addition to your labour obligations to your Lord. Between the two, almost all your time and energy are claimed by others. The church's teaching is that your suffering in this life is a test. If you endure it faithfully, you'll be rewarded in heaven. If you complain, rebel, or question, you'll go to hell. Hell is described in vivid, terrifying detail. Fire, torture, demons, eternal suffering without end. These images are reinforced through sermons, church art, and mystery plays. Hell is very real to you, and avoiding it is your primary motivation. Heaven is promised to the faithful, but it's a vague promise compared to the detailed horrors of hell. Heaven is eternal peace, union with God, freedom from suffering. It sounds good, but it's abstract. Hell is concrete and terrifying, and that's more effective at controlling behaviour. Sin is everywhere. Almost anything pleasurable is potentially sinful. Gluttony is a sin, though you're never in danger of committing it because you don't have enough food to overeat. Lust is a sin, and you confess your sexual thoughts regularly. Sloth is a sin, though again, you work so hard there's no opportunity for laziness. Pride, envy, wrath, all sins. You're constantly aware of your sinfulness and your need for God's grace. The cult of saints provides some comfort. You pray to specific saints for help with specific problems. St. Anthony for lost items, St. Apollonia for toothaches, St. Christopher for safe travel. Each saint has their specialty, and you invoke them regularly, hoping for intercession. Pilgrimages are a major aspect of religious life. If you can afford it, you might make a pilgrimage to a local shrine, or even a distant one like Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela. Pilgrimages offer spiritual benefits, earning indulgences that reduce your time in purgatory. They also offer a break from routine, a chance to travel and see new places, which is rare for peasants. Holy days punctuate the calendar. There are dozens of them throughout the year, and on these days work is forbidden except for essential tasks. You must attend church, and afterward there might be communal celebrations, feasting, and games. These holy days are your only breaks from labour, and they're welcomed, though the church's control over when you rest and when you work is another form of power over you. Superstition blends with religion. You believe in miracles, relics with healing powers, the intercession of saints, but also in witches, demons, evil spirits, and curses. The line between religion and magic is blurry. Many practices that the church condemns as superstition are still widely practiced. Charms, amulets, divination, folk magic, all coexist with official church doctrine. Heresy is the ultimate sin. If you're accused of heresy, which means believing anything contrary to church teaching, the consequences are dire. You can be tortured to extract a confession, and if found guilty, you can be burned at the stake. The church uses the fear of heresy to enforce conformity. Even questioning a priest's interpretation of scripture can be dangerous. The church tells you that your life is miserable because of original sin. Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit, and now all humanity is cursed. Your suffering is punishment for their sin and for your own sins. This theological framework justifies the social order. The rich are blessed by God. The poor are being tested. Don't question it. Accept it. Pray for relief, but don't expect it in this life. And yet, for all its oppression, the church also provides community. Church is where you see your neighbours, exchange news, and feel part of something larger than yourself. The rituals, even in Latin, are familiar and comforting. The continuity of practice, the cycle of the church calendar, gives structure to your life. In a world of uncertainty and hardship, the church's promises, however distant, offer hope. We've touched on the weather throughout this journey, but it deserves its own focus because the climate of 14th century England is both critical to your survival and beyond your control. The weather determines whether you eat or starve, whether you stay warm or freeze, whether your crops thrive or fail. And you have absolutely no power over it. The 14th century is part of the medieval warm period transitioning into the Little Ice Age. The climate is generally cooler and wetter than the centuries before, and it's becoming more unpredictable. Summers that should be warm and dry are instead cool and rainy. Winters that used to be mild are now harsh and long. The growing season is shortening, which means fewer crops and more risk of famine. Your clothing is inadequate for the weather. In winter you wear the same wool tunic you wear in summer, possibly with an additional layer if you have one, which you probably don't. Wool is warm when dry, but wet wool is heavy, cold, and takes forever to dry, and you're often wet because it rains frequently, your house leaks, and you're outside working in all weather. Your shoes, if you have them, are not waterproof. Leather absorbs water, and once wet, it stays wet. Walking through muddy fields and puddles means your feet are cold and damp all the time. This leads to trench foot, a painful condition where the skin breaks down from prolonged exposure to moisture and cold. Many peasants develop chronic foot problems that make walking painful but don't stop the need to work. In your house there's no insulation beyond the thickness of the wattle and daub walls and the thatch roof. Heat from the fire dissipates quickly. The floor is cold and damp. Drafts come through every gap and crack. In winter, you can see your breath indoors. Water left overnight freezes. Getting out from under your blanket in the morning is an act of willpower because the air is so cold. You sleep in all your clothes, plus your blanket, and still you shiver through the night. Sometimes, for extra warmth, the whole family huddles together. Body heat is the best heat you have. Children sleep between parents. Sometimes even the pig's warmth is appreciated despite the smell. Frostbite is common in winter. Fingers and toes turn white, then numb, then black if the frostbite is severe. You lose feeling in your extremities. Some peasants lose fingers or toes to frostbite, further impairing their ability to work. There's no treatment except to slowly rewarm the affected area and hope the damage isn't permanent. Hypothermia kills people in their sleep during the coldest winters. You go to bed, weakened by malnutrition and exhaustion, and the cold creeps in. Your body temperature drops. You drift into unconsciousness, and by morning you're dead. This is especially common among the elderly and the very young, whose bodies can't regulate temperature as well. Spring brings rain, endless rain. The fields turn to mud. Walking anywhere means slogging through knee-deep muck. Your feet slip, you fall, you're covered in mud, and you keep working because the planting must be done on schedule regardless of weather. The rain also brings out the vermin. Slugs and snails eat your young plants. Mice and rats multiply in the wet conditions, invading your home and stores. Mosquitoes and flies breed in standing water, biting constantly, spreading disease. Summer should be a relief, but it's often cool and overcast. The sun hides behind clouds for days. Your crops grow slowly, struggling without consistent sunlight. And when the sun does shine, it's accompanied by humidity that makes the air thick and oppressive. Sweat soaks your clothes, but there's no breeze to cool you. You're as uncomfortable in summer as in winter, just in different ways. Storms are terrifying. Thunder and lightning strike without warning. Lightning can set fire to your thatch roof, destroying your home and everything in it. High winds tear off thatch, topple trees and flatten crops. Hailstorms pummel you if you're caught outside and destroy whatever crops you've managed to grow. There's no weather forecast, no warning system. Storms just arrive, and you deal with the consequences. Autumn is harvest time, which should be the best season, but it's also a race against time and weather. You must get the crops in before the autumn rains turn the fields to mud and before the first frost kills anything still growing. Every day of good weather is precious. You work from dawn to dusk, pushing your body to its limits, knowing that one bad storm could ruin months of work. And then winter comes again, the cycle repeating. Each year is a gamble. Will the weather cooperate? Will the crops survive? Will you have enough food to last until next harvest? Or will this be the year of famine? The year you watch your children's bellies swell with hunger? The year you bury family members who starve to death? Climate-related famines are a recurring nightmare in medieval England. The Great Famine of 1315-1317, which occurs just 10 years before our imagined day, kills millions across Europe. 3 years of cold, wet weather ruin harvests. Grain doesn't ripen. Potatoes, which might have helped, haven't been introduced to Europe yet. Livestock die from disease and lack of fodder. During the famine, people eat anything. Cats, dogs, rats. They boil leather shoes for nutrition. They eat grass, tree bark, earth. Parents abandon children because they can't feed them. Some reports mention cannibalism, though these are disputed. Crime skyrockets as desperate people steal food. Bodies lie in the streets of towns, too many to bury promptly. And you, in our imagined 1325, are still recovering from that famine. Food stores are low, your body is weakened. Another bad harvest will push you back to the brink. This is the reality of medieval life. You're always one bad season away from starvation. The weather also affects your health directly. Cold and damp exacerbate respiratory problems. Arthritis flares in wet weather. Infections spread faster in unsanitary conditions made worse by rain and mud. In summer, heat and humidity promote the growth of mold and bacteria. There's no central heating, no air conditioning, no way to moderate the temperature. You're at the mercy of nature. And nature, in 14th century England, is harsh and uncaring. Everything described so far applies to both men and women. But if you're a woman in medieval England, you carry additional burdens that make your already difficult life even harder. Gender inequality is not just accepted, it's divinely ordained according to the teachings of the Church. Women are considered inferior to men, physically, mentally, and morally. This belief shapes every aspect of your life. From birth, you're valued less than a male child. Boys are celebrated because they can work the fields, inherit property, and carry on the family name. Girls are seen as temporary members of the household who will eventually leave to marry and belong to another family. If food is scarce, boys eat first. If there's money for education, which there rarely is for peasants, it goes to boys. As a girl, you're trained from early childhood to serve. You help your mother with all domestic tasks. By age 7 or 8, you're capable of cooking, cleaning, spinning, and sewing. You learn these skills not in school, which you don't attend, but by watching and doing. Your education is practical, focused entirely on preparing you to be a wife and mother. Marriage is not your choice. It's arranged by your father, or if he's dead, by your male relatives or lord. You might be consulted, but your opinion is not decisive. The goal is to create an alliance, pool resources, or settle debts. Love is irrelevant. You marry who you're told to marry, and you do it young, often in your early to mid-teens, though sometimes later depending on economic circumstances. Once married, you're legally subordinate to your husband. He controls everything. Any property you brought to the marriage becomes his. Any money you earn is his. You cannot make contracts, cannot own property independently, cannot take legal action without his permission. In the eyes of the law, you're not a full person, you're a dependent. Your husband has the legal right to discipline you, which means he can beat you. Wife beating is not only legal, but is considered a husband's duty if his wife is disobedient. The only restrictions are that he shouldn't kill you or injure you so severely that you can't work. As long as the violence stays within these broad boundaries, no one intervenes. If you complain, you're told to be a better wife. Sexual consent within marriage is not a concept. Your husband has conjugal rights, meaning he can demand sex whenever he wants, and you must comply. Refusing him is grounds for punishment. The church teaches that one of the primary purposes of marriage is procreation, so sex is expected and required. This leads to frequent pregnancies. Without effective contraception, which the church forbids anyway, you're pregnant most of your fertile years. Pregnancy and childbirth, as we've discussed, are dangerous. Every pregnancy risks your life. Complications are common, and medical help is limited or harmful. Many women die in childbirth or from related infections. If you survive childbirth, you face the challenge of caring for an infant while continuing all your other work. There's no maternity leave. You're expected to return to work immediately, carrying your baby with you, or leaving it in the care of older children. Breastfeeding is the only option for feeding infants, and it's done on demand whenever the baby cries, while you're trying to cook, clean, or work in the fields. Miscarriages are common due to poor nutrition, hard physical labour, and lack of medical care. You've probably had several pregnancies that ended in miscarriage, and each one is accompanied by grief, pain, and the risk of hemorrhage or infection. But you're expected to accept it as God's will and move on. If your baby survives, and roughly half don't make it past age 5, you're responsible for raising them while also doing all your other work. You feed them, clean them, teach them, protect them, all while maintaining the household, working in the fields and serving your husband. Your workload is staggering. You do all the field work the men do, ploughing, planting, weeding, harvesting. And you do all the domestic work, cooking, cleaning, washing, spinning, weaving, sewing, brewing, caring for children, tending animals, managing the garden. You work from before dawn to after dark every single day with no break, except Sundays and holy days, and even then there's work to be done. You're also responsible for managing the household economy. You decide how to stretch limited resources, how to make food last, how to barter and trade to get what you need. This requires skill and intelligence, but it's unrecognised and unvalued. It's just expected. Menstruation, as mentioned earlier, is another burden. The church teaches that women are unclean during their periods. You're forbidden from entering the church, touching holy objects, or participating in certain activities. This stigma and the lack of sanitary products make menstruation uncomfortable and humiliating. Menopause, when it comes, usually in your 40s if you live that long, brings its own challenges. Hot flashes, mood changes, and physical discomfort are blamed on your sinful nature or the influence of demons. There's no understanding of hormones or any treatment. You suffer through it alone. If you're widowed, your situation becomes even more precarious. As a widow, you might inherit a small amount of property or the right to continue farming your husband's land, but you're vulnerable. You're expected to remarry, especially if you're still young, because a woman alone is seen as a problem. You might be pressured to marry a relative of your late husband to keep the land in the family, or you might be married off to someone chosen by your lord. If you don't remarry, you're economically vulnerable. You're doing all the work yourself that a married couple would share. You might rent out your land and work as a servant or labourer, or you might become dependent on your children, assuming they survive and are willing to support you. If you're accused of witchcraft, which can happen for almost any reason, your life is over. Being a woman who's outspoken, who has arguments with neighbours, who has herbal knowledge, who's simply disliked, all these can lead to accusations. Witch trials are becoming more common, and they're almost always directed at women. If accused, you're tortured to extract a confession, and then you're burned or hanged. There's no real defence. Even in the best circumstances as a woman, you're constantly reminded that you're inferior. Church teachings emphasise that Eve caused the fall, and that all women bear the guilt of original sin. You're portrayed as weak, emotional, irrational, and morally suspect. You're told to be silent, obedient, submissive, and chaste. Your value is measured by your service to men and your ability to bear sons. And yet, despite all this, you endure. You find small ways to exercise agency, to support each other, to maintain your dignity in an oppressive system. Female friendships and networks provide crucial support. You help each other in childbirth, share resources, and offer comfort. These relationships are lifelines in a harsh world, but the systemic inequality, the extra labour, the dangers of childbirth, the violence and control, all these make being a woman in medieval England exponentially harder than being a man. Violence permeates medieval society at every level, and as a peasant, you're constantly at risk. The modern concept of human rights doesn't exist. The idea that your body and life are inviolable is alien. Violence is a tool of control, a means of resolving disputes, and a form of entertainment. Justice in your world is brutal and public. When someone commits a crime, the punishment is designed to hurt, humiliate, and deter. Minor offences might result in time in the stocks or pillory, wooden devices that lock your head and hands in place while you're displayed in the village square. Passers-by are encouraged to mock you, throw rotten food, or worse. You stand there for hours or days, unable to defend yourself, suffering public humiliation. More serious crimes result in corporal punishment. Stealing might cost you a hand, cut off with an axe in a public ceremony. Lying or gossiping can result in your tongue being cut, or you being forced to wear a scold's bridle, a metal cage that fits over your head with a bar that goes in your mouth, preventing you from speaking and causing pain if you try. Adultery, particularly by women, can be punished by public whipping. You're stripped to the waist and flogged through the streets while the townspeople watch. The pain is excruciating, and the scars are permanent, marking you for life. The death penalty is common, and is carried out in ways designed to maximise suffering and provide spectacle. Hanging is the standard method. The condemned is led to a gallows, a noose is placed around their neck, and they're pushed off a platform or cart. But medieval hanging isn't the quick neck-breaking method used in later centuries. It's slow strangulation. The person hangs, struggling and gasping for several minutes before losing consciousness and eventually dying. The crowd watches, and it's considered entertainment. For more serious crimes like treason or heresy, the punishment is even worse. Burning at the stake is reserved for heretics. The condemned is tied to a post, wood is piled around them, and the fire is lit. The person screams as they burn alive. The smell of burning flesh fills the air. The crowd watches, some horrified, some fascinated, all understanding the message. This is what happens if you defy the church or the king. Drawing and quartering is the punishment for high treason. The condemned is hanged but cut down before death, then disemboweled and castrated while still alive. Finally, the body is cut into 4 parts, which are displayed in different locations as a warning. This is rare, mostly reserved for political crimes, but the fact that it exists shows the extremes of medieval violence. Trial by ordeal is still used in some places, though it's being phased out. If you're accused of a crime and the evidence is unclear, you might be subjected to an ordeal to determine your guilt. In trial by hot water, you must plunge your hand into boiling water to retrieve a stone. Your hand is then bandaged, and after 3 days, the bandage is removed. If the wound has healed cleanly, you're innocent. If it's infected, you're guilty. The whole process is rigged. Almost everyone develops an infection, so almost everyone is found guilty. Another ordeal is trial by fire, where you must walk a certain distance over hot coals, or carry a burning iron rod. Again, if your burns heal cleanly, you're innocent. If not, you're guilty. And the healing standard is determined by the same authorities who accused you, so fairness is not part of the equation. Trial by water involves being bound and thrown into a river or pond. If you sink, you're innocent, and hopefully someone pulls you out before you drown. If you float, you're guilty, because the water has rejected you, and you're then subjected to whatever punishment fits your crime. It's absurd, but it's taken seriously. Beyond official punishment, violence is part of daily life. Domestic violence, as we've discussed, is common and legal. Children are beaten regularly as a form of discipline. The saying, "spare the rod, spoil the child," is taken literally. Parents, teachers, masters all use physical punishment freely. Fights between peasants are common. Disputes over land boundaries, animals, debts, insults, any number of issues can escalate to violence. Men settle arguments with fists, sticks, knives. Brawls break out at taverns, at markets, after church. The law is more concerned with maintaining order and collecting fines than with protecting individuals, so many of these fights go unpunished unless someone is seriously injured or killed. Murder happens, and while it's technically illegal, enforcement is inconsistent. If the murderer can pay a fine or has connections, they might escape serious punishment. If they're poor and friendless, they'll hang. Justice is not blind. It's influenced by wealth and status. Rape is a crime, but only technically. If a woman is raped, she has almost no recourse. She must prove she resisted, which often means showing injuries. She must report it immediately, which is dangerous because she might be blamed. If she's married, her husband might divorce her for being defiled. If she's unmarried, her prospects for marriage are ruined. Many rapes go unreported because the consequences for the victim are so severe. If a rape case goes to trial, the accused is rarely punished harshly, unless he's of low status and she's of high status. More often, the solution is for the rapist to marry the victim, turning the crime into a marriage, which is somehow considered acceptable. War is another source of violence that impacts peasants directly. The 100 Years' War between England and France is ongoing, and while major battles might be fought elsewhere, the consequences reach every village. Armies pass through, requisitioning food, animals, and supplies. Soldiers loot, rape, and kill with impunity. Your village might be burned, your livestock stolen, your family assaulted, all in the name of some distant conflict between kings and nobles that has nothing to do with you. Bandits are a constant threat. Unemployed soldiers, desperate peasants, outlaws hiding in forests, all prey on travellers and isolated farms. If you travel, even short distances, you risk being robbed, injured, or killed. Roads are dangerous, especially after dark, and there's no police force to protect you. Even animals pose a threat. Dogs are often aggressive. Not the friendly pets of today, but semi-wild animals kept for guarding. They can attack without warning. Wild animals like wolves and boars, though less common than they once were, still exist in forests and can be dangerous if encountered. In this environment, you learn to be constantly alert. You walk carefully, avoid confrontations, keep your head down. You don't draw attention to yourself. You don't stand out. You accept violence as inevitable and hope it doesn't happen to you today. As the sun begins to set, you finally drag yourself back from the fields. Your body is screaming in pain. Every muscle aches. Your back feels like it might break. Your hands are blistered and bleeding from handling tools all day. You're covered in dirt, sweat, and other substances you'd rather not think about. You smell like a combination of animal, earth, and desperation. The walk back to your hut feels longer than it did this morning. Your legs are heavy. Each step requires conscious effort. But you keep moving because stopping means you won't start again, and there's still more to do before you can sleep. At home, your spouse is preparing the evening meal, which will be similar to what you ate this morning. Pottage, bread if there's any left, and ale. The children are tired and cranky, fighting among themselves. The pig is making noise, demanding its evening slops. The chickens are settling in for the night, making their soft clucking sounds. You sit on a stool near the fire, which has been built up for the evening cooking. The warmth feels good on your cold, aching body. You peel off your shoes, if you wore them, and examine your feet. Blisters, cuts, bruises, nothing unusual. You've learned to ignore minor injuries because there's no point focusing on them. They'll heal or they won't. The evening meal is served. It's the same as breakfast, maybe with a few additional vegetables if any were harvested today. You eat hungrily, but even as you're eating, you're aware that it's not enough. It never is. You'll go to bed hungry again, your children will go to bed hungry. Tomorrow you'll wake up hungry and do it all over again. After eating, there are a few final tasks. The animals need to be secured for the night. The fire needs to be banked so it will last until morning without burning down the house. Tools need to be stored properly. Anything left outside might be stolen or damaged by weather. Your children are put to bed on their straw mattresses. They fall asleep quickly, exhausted from their day. Your spouse joins them, and you know you should too, but you sit for a moment longer, staring into the fire, trying to find the energy to face another day tomorrow. The night outside is dark, truly dark in a way modern people never experience. There are no streetlights, no lights from neighbouring houses, no light pollution. When the moon isn't out, the darkness is complete and oppressive. Strange sounds come from outside, animals moving, wind in the trees, sometimes human sounds, voices or footsteps that make you tense until they pass. You're afraid of the dark, not irrationally, but because real dangers lurk in it. Thieves, wild animals, demons and evil spirits, or so you believe. The line between rational fear and superstition is blurry when you don't understand the world scientifically. Every unexplained sound or shadow could be a threat. Finally, you lie down on your mattress. The straw pokes through the fabric, jabbing your skin. The lice and fleas immediately begin their nightly feast. You pull the heavy blanket over yourself, even though it smells and weighs on you uncomfortably. At least it's warm. Sleep doesn't come easily. Your body hurts too much. Your mind is too active, worrying about tomorrow, about the coming winter, about whether the harvest will be enough, about the rent you owe, about your children's health. You worry about everything because everything is genuinely uncertain and threatening. When sleep finally does come, it's fitful. You wake multiple times during the night to tend the fire because you're cold, because you're uncomfortable, because you need to urinate and have to stumble to the bucket or outside to the pit, because a child is crying, because the pig is making noise, because you're hungry. And then, what feels like moments later but is actually several hours, the church bell rings for lauds, and the cycle begins again. Another day of pain, labour, hunger, and fear. Another day of just trying to survive. So here we are at the end of our 24-hour journey through medieval peasant life. And the question that started this whole exploration has an obvious answer now, doesn't it? Why wouldn't you survive as a medieval peasant? Let's be clear. It's not about toughness. It's not about work ethic. It's not about character. The humans of the 14th century were the same species as us. They had the same capacity for intelligence, emotion, endurance. They loved their families. They found moments of joy. They survived day after day, year after year, in conditions that would break most modern people. But they were adapted to their world in ways you're not. They never knew anything different. From birth, they were conditioned to accept hunger, cold, pain, and fear as normal. Their immune systems, while not protecting them from many diseases, had been exposed since birth to the constant barrage of pathogens in their environment. Their bodies, though damaged by labour, were hardened to physical demands that would hospitalise a modern person within days. You, on the other hand, have lived your entire life with central heating and air conditioning. Your body has never experienced sustained cold or heat. You've never gone truly hungry, not the kind of hunger that lasts for months. You've never worked a 14-hour day of manual labour, not once, let alone every day for years. Your immune system, despite modern medicine's miracles, is in many ways weaker than a medieval peasant's in specific contexts. You haven't been exposed to the diseases they lived with constantly. Parasitic infections that they barely noticed would sicken you severely. The water they drank would give you dysentery. The food they ate, contaminated with bacteria and mould, would poison you. The psychological aspects would be even more challenging. You've grown up with privacy, personal space, control over your own life. The medieval world offers none of that. Every decision is made by someone else. Your lord controls your labour. The church controls your morality and calendar. Your husband, if you're a woman, controls everything about your life. The lack of autonomy would be suffocating. You're used to comfort. Soft beds, hot showers, clean clothes, abundant food, medical care, entertainment. You expect these things. You'd be constantly aware of what you're missing. The medieval peasant didn't know these things existed, so they didn't miss them. But you would. Every moment would be a comparison to your modern life, and the medieval world would fall short in every possible way. The pain would be overwhelming. Every part of your body would hurt. Within days, your hands would be covered in blisters that burst and become infected. Your back would seize up from the unaccustomed bending and lifting. Your feet would develop sores and bruises. The physical labour would damage your body faster than it could heal. The hunger would consume your thoughts. Modern people who fast voluntarily, even for a day, think about food constantly. Imagine that hunger lasting not hours but months, years, never being full, always being on the edge of starvation. It would drive you to distraction. The diseases would kill you. The infant mortality, the lack of antibiotics, the prevalence of parasites and infections, all the ailments we casually cure with a trip to the pharmacy would be death sentences. A simple cut could lead to sepsis. A cavity could kill you. Childbirth would be Russian roulette. The odds of dying young, even if you were exceptionally careful, would be overwhelming. The violence would traumatize you. Modern people in developed countries are sheltered from routine violence. We see it on screens, not in person. The medieval peasants saw public executions, whippings, mutilations. They experienced domestic violence, random assaults, and war. This would break your psyche. The hopelessness would crush your spirit. In the modern world, even in difficult circumstances, there's hope for change. You can change jobs, move to a new place, improve your situation. In medieval times, there was no hope of change. You were born a peasant, you lived as a peasant, you died as a peasant. Your children would be peasants. Nothing you did would change that. The sheer futility of it would be unbearable. And finally, the lack of meaning beyond religious promises would leave you empty. The church offered heaven, but that was a distant, abstract reward for a lifetime of suffering. Modern people have diverse sources of meaning: personal achievement, relationships, experiences, self-expression. Medieval peasants had survival and salvation, and for many that wasn't enough. The statistics are clear. Life expectancy in medieval England was between 30 and 35 years at birth. If you made it past childhood, you might live into your 40s or 50s, but that was still young. The leading causes of death were infectious diseases, malnutrition, accidents, childbirth complications for women, and injuries. All of these were endemic and unavoidable. Modern humans dropped into that world would fare even worse. Without the childhood conditioning, without the hardened immune system, without the psychological resignation, you'd likely die within a year. An infection, a bad winter, a crop failure, any of 100 things would kill you. But even beyond the physical survival, you wouldn't survive in the sense of maintaining your sanity and humanity. The constant degradation, the lack of dignity, the pervasive violence and injustice, the grinding poverty and hopelessness, these would destroy your sense of self. Medieval peasants endured because they had to. and because they didn't know any other life was possible. They found small joys, communal festivals, the brief relief of harvest time, the love of family, the comfort of familiar routines. They were human, and humans adapt. But their lives were harsh beyond modern comprehension. The medieval period is often romanticized. We think of castles and knights, of a simpler time before modernity's complexities. But that romantic vision ignores the reality for the vast majority of people. Life for medieval peasants was nasty, brutish, and short, to borrow Hobbes's famous phrase. It was defined by suffering that we can barely imagine. So when you're lying in your comfortable bed tonight, in your heated home, with running water down the hall and a fully stocked kitchen, take a moment to appreciate it. Not because you personally did anything to deserve it beyond the accident of being born in the modern era, but because the alternative, the life we've explored today, was truly hellish. The medieval peasants who endured that life deserve our respect, not our romanticization. They survived horrors we cannot imagine, and they did so with courage and resilience. But we should never want to go back. Never look at the past as simpler or better. It was worse in almost every way that matters. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep in comfort and safety, remember the peasant lying on straw, shivering, hungry, covered in parasites, terrified of the dark and of tomorrow. Remember that this was not fiction, but reality for millions of people for centuries. And be grateful, deeply grateful that you live now and not then. Because if you had, you wouldn't have survived. None of us would. Sleep well.